can't find my way home.
It's safe to say that Metal Gear Survive had pretty much everything going against it leading up to release, thanks to the highly publicized and controversial departure of series lead Hideo Kojima back in 2015, and the subsequent rebranding of most of Konami's beloved game series into pachinko machines. Still, it's best not to judge a game based on studio drama. After all, what matters in the end is the finished product. So the question is, can Metal Gear survive without the highly influential series lead?
To enter the gates of hell, you had to shed everything.
The story picks up shortly after the attack on Mother Base at the end of Ground Zeroes. You play as a player-made character dubbed the Captain, who is originally introduced as deceased, but thanks to a mysterious man known as Good Luck, you are brought back to life and awaken on a mysterious world known as Dite. A world that is overrun by zombie-like creatures called Wanderers, and it's your job to find survivors in this world and figure out how to get home.
While it looks a lot like ours, it's populated by Wanderers. It's like a vision of hell.
The biggest problem with the story is that none of the characters are particularly interesting, nor do they feel like they contribute much to the story. In fact, the first ally you meet pretty much sits on his ass doing nothing for the first few hours, and only really contributes when he has to save another ally that gets into trouble, sometimes off-screen. It also doesn't help that these characters can be rather idiotic at times. One character, who is supposed to be a qualified nurse, seems to be convinced that the Wanderers can be cured and made human again, despite the fact that, they're missing the top half of their heads and have a large crystal spire growing out of what's left of their jaw. Qualified nurse? Are you sure, Konami?
Maybe they just lack certain advances in medicine, and like you said, they're still living.
It also doesn't help that most of the story is told through audio-only dialogue screens. True, there's supposed to be a callback to Metal Gear Solid's codec conversations, but the thing is, those conversations happened over the radio if characters weren't in the same room, and also used as a way to convey optional exposition. Here, they're used frequently, even if the characters are in the same spot, and it just ends up feeling cheap and rushed overall. Even towards the end of the 16 to 20 hour story, when a whole bunch of plot twists and revelations start to come forward, it really becomes hard to care about any of it when there's no reason to care about the characters to begin with.
Forget it. Sorry for butting in.
But hey, Metal Gear Solid 5's story also had a lot of problems, and it still ended up being a phenomenal game based on its open-world gameplay, right? So, can Survive do the same?
You are likely to encounter Wanderers. Proceed with caution.
Well, for starters, the game runs on Metal Gear Solid 5's Fox engine, and it's still just as intuitive, versatile, and gorgeous to look at as it was in that game. Though, the latter mostly comes down from the fact that a lot of the open-world assets from MGS5 are reused and rearranged. That's not necessarily a bad thing on its own, though don't expect massive innovations here if you're already familiar with 5.
Prepare yourself for what may lie ahead.
Of course, the biggest difference is the survive part of the title. As such, you'll need to salvage parts to craft weapons, gear, and medicine, as well as hunt for food and search for water to keep your thirst and hunger meters stable. And well, since your character seems to have absurdly high metabolism, you'll need to find a lot of food to keep your hunger high, since the meters deteriorate quickly and the food you get from animals isn't much. Seriously, what sense does it make that you can hunt a fully grown brown bear, but when you cook its meat, you'll only be a third full? Portions of the open world map are covered in large shrouds of dust, for which you'll also need a supply of oxygen to traverse. And you'll need to travel through this section a lot since it often yields the best loot to craft materials with. While out in the dust, your visibility is limited, your map doesn't work, and you'll end up using twice as much stamina. Not to mention the fact that these areas are crawling with enemies everywhere. So in all, it can be pretty tense since you'll need to be aware of your surroundings and your oxygen supply.
Always keep an eye on your oxygen gauge.
Of course, enemies are pretty challenging to fight, especially if you're using melee combat, and you'll need to do this for a large portion of the game, at least until you get a bow, especially seeing as a lot of more advanced moves necessary to make melee more survivable have to be unlocked by leveling up your character.
By using the power of Kuban energy to strengthen your body, you can learn special abilities called skills.
So it really is a case of where you have to pick your battles when out in the open, though you don't always get that luxury.
Defend the transporter until the reactivation process is complete.
At various points in the game, you'll need to defend teleportation stations for a certain period of time. for which you'll need to deploy defenses like fences, barricades, and traps to hold off wanderers until the thing comes online. There's a lot of strategy involved with planning where you set up your defenses and deciding what weapons you need to use, and at times it can actually be rather fun, especially when you're rewarded with large amounts of crystals that you can use to level up your character. The thing is, however, that these tower defense-like sections show up a lot during the game, and they can often burn through your limited supplies very quickly. There's also more advanced defense sections where you have to hold off multiple waves of enemies while they drill harvest materials for a certain period of time. They can be fun for the first 3 or 4 times, but they do get repetitive after a while when you realize how many of them there are in the game.
I'd say you're getting the hang of this routine.
It doesn't help that for a survival game, the game has some annoying issues that deter exploration. We came across one station that for some reason didn't seem to activate, and later realized it was because the teleporter had to be turned on in a story mission. It's this sort of deterrence that makes exploration not worth it most of the time. There are also portions where you have to infiltrate enemy-infested compounds in a throwback to classic Metal Gear games, usually to access a context-sensitive server. It's here that the Fox engine works the best, mostly due to the fact that the engine was built with stealth in mind. The problem is that your rapidly decreasing survival meters make it an unnecessary hassle, since stealth has always been about being patient and waiting for the right opportunity to make your move. Also, crouching uses stamina. What? That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Enemy AI is also easy to exploit in these areas. Take these spider-like creatures for example. Here I shot an arrow at the floor to make them all go to the one location and end up clipping into one another's bodies, allowing me to kill them all with one arrow, effectively deflating a possibly tense sequence due to unpolished game design. You have to manage your base during the game. And it's here that you craft weapons, cook food, and assign roles to other allies similar to the mother base portion of the Phantom Pain, though nowhere near as in-depth and somewhat undercooked. The roles you assign range from maintaining crops to going on their own expeditions, but later in the game though you'll also need to keep an eye on your team's necessities along with your own, and it will mostly be you doing the legwork.
To keep crew members alive, we need common resources.
Oh yeah, and there are microtransactions in the form of SV coins. These give you a temporary stat boost, or allow you to unlock more teams to send off on expeditions. The former feeling really unnecessary, and the latter being a pain that it's behind a paywall, since expeditions are the only way to gather resources outside of doing all the work.
But once that's over, me and the captain are done.
Then there's the co-op multiplayer mode, where you meet up with 3 other people online to redo the drilling defense missions from the main game against tougher enemies. If you got a chance to play the beta before the launch, then you pretty much know what to expect when it comes to these modes, and again this section can be pretty fun to mess around with. But there's one major problem with co-op. Your resources, weapons, and progression are tied to the single player mode, meaning if you end up on a team where other players are useless, you've essentially wasted valuable weapons and ammo for nothing, and if the players are too good or exploit the missions, you can end up with so many items that it can essentially make the single player game too easy. It's a lose-lose situation, and as such is something that really should only be touched once you're done with the story. Metal Gear Survive isn't exactly the ideal return for such a pristine series. The survival elements cause issues with both the action and stealth sections, the story is forgettable, co-op is a mess, and the limited mission variety get repetitive after a while. Is there fun to be had with this game? At times, yes. But there's also so much baggage that comes with it that we can only recommend this game as a rental. I guess the name change is appropriate. Metal Gear is a series that used to be solid, but now it's just trying to survive.
Captain, I dare say, our mission has ended in failure.
Thanks for watching Mojo Plays. Be sure to subscribe and click on the link in the description below to check out our suggestion page and vote on what content you'd like to see us cover next.